When God Was a Woman by Marilyn Stone, the landmark exploration of the ancient worship of the great goddess and the eventual suppression of women's rights. Preface. How did it actually happen? How did men initially gain the control that now allows them to regulate the world in matters as vastly diverse as deciding which wars will be fought, when to, what time dinner should be served? This book is the result of my reactions to these and similar questions, which many of us concerned about the status of women in our society have been asking ourselves and each other. As if in answer to our queries, yet another question presented itself. What else might we expect in a society that for centuries has taught young children, both female and male, that a male deity created the universe and all that is in it, produced man in his own divine image, and then, as an afterthought, created woman to obediently help man in his endeavors? The image of Eve created for her husband, from her husband, the woman who was supposed to have brought about the downfall of humankind, has in many ways become the image of all women. How did this idea ever come into being? Few people who live in societies where Christianity, Judaism, or Islam are followed remain unaware of the tale of Eve heeding the word of the serpent in the Garden of Eden, eating the forbidden fruit and then tempting Adam to do the same. Generally, during the most impressionable years of childhood, we are taught that it was this act of eating the tasty fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil that caused the loss of paradise, the expulsion of Adam and Eve, thus all humankind from this first home of bliss and contentment. We are also made to understand that, as a result of this act, it was decreed by God that woman must submit to the dominance of man, who was at that time divinely presented with the right to rule over her from that moment until now. The expulsion of Adam and Eve from the garden is not exactly the latest news, but few contemporary happenings have affected women of today any more directly. In the struggle to achieve equal status for women, in a society still permeated by the values and moralities of Judeo-Christian beliefs, which have penetrated deeply into even the most secular aspects of our contemporary civilization, we soon realize that a thorough examination of this creation legend, alongside its historical origins, provides us with vital information. It allows us to comprehend the role that contemporary religions have played in the initial and continual oppression and subjugation of women, and the reasons for this. In prehistoric and early historic periods of human development, religions existed in which people revered their supreme creator as female. The great goddess, the divine ancestress, had been worshipped from the beginnings of the Neolithic periods of 7000 BC until the closing of the last goddess temples about AD 500. Some authorities would extend goddess worship as far into the past of the Upper Paleolithic age of about 25,000 BC. Yet events of the Bible, which we are generally taught to think of as taking place in the beginning of time, actually occurred in historic periods. Abraham, first prophet of the Hebrew Christian God Yahweh, more familiarly known as Jehovah, is believed by most Bible scholars to have lived no earlier than 1800 BC and possibly as late as 1550 BC. Most significant is the realization that for thousands of years, both religions existed simultaneously among closely neighboring peoples. Archaeological, mythological, and historical evidence all reveal that the female religion, far from naturally fading away, was the victim of centuries of continual persecution and suppression by the advocates of the newer religions, which held male deities as supreme. And from these new religions came the creation myth of Adam and Eve and the tale of the loss of paradise. What had life been like for women who lived in a society that venerated a wise and valiant female creator? Why had the members of the later male religions fought so aggressively to suppress that earlier worship, even the very memory of it? What did the legend of Adam and Eve really signify? And when and why was it written? The answers I discovered have formed the contents of this book, When God Was a Woman. The story of the suppression of women's rights has been written to explain the historical events and political attitudes that led to the writing of the Judeo-Christian myth of the fall, the loss of paradise, and most important, why the blame for that loss was attributed to the woman Eve and has ever since been placed heavily upon all women.